Hello and welcome to On the Cube Leadership Podcast. This is episode 50 and our last one for this year. Yes, our last episode for this year. We're going to take December off because December's always crazy for myself, especially with my co-host, Dr. Rod Saint, who I'll be introducing in a moment as a pastor of a local church. There's a lot of things that goes on. Craziness of Christmas time. And so we thought, let's take some time for ourselves. But if you're feeling sad that this is our last one for the year, don't worry, we'll be back next year. But I encourage you, go back and watch a whole bunch of the other ones that you haven't watched before. This is our 50th episode, so there's a lot of episodes for you to watch over the time. Also, if you want to listen to us on podcast, on audio, Apple Podcasts, and on SoundCloud if you're on an Android, and also we cut this up into clips as well, so you don't have to watch the whole thing at once. If you want to get snippets, there's also clips available. So check them out on our channel. And hey, I've never done this at the start, but give us a thumbs up and give us a subscribe as well if you like this content and you want to catch up on all of those other content. Now, I will be talking to my team and see if we can release some other content throughout the time as well. See if there's some other archive resources we can release for you. But today, I actually feel like we've reached a crescendo is the right way to say it, a crescendo today with the topic that we're going to be talking about leaders changing culture. Yeah, when we talk about leadership, there are so many different facets to leadership. And remember, leadership is not about a strategy, it's about a behavior. Right? And behavior comes from culture. And we want to be able to shape culture as leaders. We want to shape the culture of our business, of our family, of our ministry, of our nation if we're politicians or whatever group we're a part of. If we're a leader, we want to be able to impart and be able to influence that culture in some way. And we hope that you want to influence it in the right way. And so we're going to be talking about what culture is good to influence with. Maybe we're going to be talking about some bad culture as well. But we're going to be talking about a bunch of things that have been happening in the news lately about people trying to change or certain changes that are happening in culture and how the leaders are handling it. And we'll discuss how we would do it differently or what we like about what they did. And hopefully you too can learn to be a better leader and influence for positive culture with with whatever sphere you're influencing. But I keep saying we, us, it's not just me yammering on for the next hour and a half. I am joined by Dr. Rod St. Hill, business pastor. Dr. Rod, welcome once again.
Oh, it's always good to be with you, Craig, even though this is our last one for the year, but I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'll be honest, it was kind of a little bittersweet deleting the events from my calendar over the next couple of weeks. It was kind of like, freeing up all that space, but it was a little bit sad because I'm like, I like doing this podcast. And I love an excuse. I mean, obviously you and I are still going to catch up anyway, but I love an excuse to be able to have an in-depth conversation around things. So we are going to have in-depth conversations. Let's start by talking about Marvel. Yep, Marvel. There was recently The Marvels was released, and we've spoken about it before that Disney has done a bit of a forced culture change. And so, we've noticed this with a lot of the movies. We've actually spoken about a lot of them over this year, that a lot of them are bombed and everything like that. So, Yash, can I get you to chuck that up onto screen for us? Thanks, Yash. Awesome. So, the Marvels movie that was just recently released, let's say bombed is probably a bit of an understatement. Well, actually, I don't know. It says its box openings were 47 million. I don't know. 47 million isn't nothing to sneeze at. However, if you look at the fact that they spent $300 million on producing and marketing the movie, 47 million is a little bit tough. Now, you probably think, yeah, but over the time they'll make their money back and everything like that. Yeah, yes, they will. Yeah, maybe they will. Maybe they will. But if we put comparison, Endgame, which was the last, let's be honest, the last decent Marvel movie that was released, Endgame had a $650 million box office weekend. 650 compared to 47. There's a big change there. Now, there's a bit, and as always, links to all of the articles that we're referring to are down below in the description. And this was a report from Deadline, but it was the video that I caught up on. This was from Tim Pool from Timcast IRL podcast, and he was just commenting on it. And he was commenting of what we all know about this rapid, forced shift in culture. They're trying to shove this culture change. Disney as a whole are trying to shove this culture change down our throats. They're trying, they're changing casts out to more diversity and changing storylines to including homosexuality and all this sort of stuff. Like they're doing all of this crazy stuff to force this culture change down our throats. And it doesn't seem to be working. Or is it, Dr. Rod? What do you think about... Now, I know, look, if we're trying to change culture, it takes time to change culture, right? Culture change happens over time. This sudden force, it's obviously pretty hard to figure whether it's actually working yet, because it's going to be generations to see whether it's actually working. But what's your take on this almost an instant shift in culture that's happened, with Disney?
Well, I mean, it does look as if they are trying to force a cultural shift, and they seem to want to do it very, very quickly. And that probably is why they're not doing so well in recent times, because people are not ready for that shift. And of course, there's a lot of pushback now.
Yes.
Particularly in the United States, and we're going to talk later on about what's going on in the political areas. And I think there is a lot of pushback, because the truth is most of us are reasonably conservative.
Yeah.
Most of us have the attitude, what you do in your own home, like in the privacy of your own home, away from the public glare, that's your business. But don't shove your business down my throat.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing a bit of that. And look, frankly, I haven't seen a Marvel movie for years and years and years. I don't have any interest in it anymore. But I just think people would rather all of this stuff be kept behind closed doors, as it were.
Yeah.
They don't want to see it. And my wife and I, a couple of years ago, we just stopped subscribing to some of the streaming services, because so much of what they were making available just really didn't align with our own worldview, our own ways of thinking. And so we did what many others have done. We just said, well, we're just not going to spend our money on this kind of thing for the few good movies that are available, which we can probably get elsewhere anyway.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we're seeing with Disney is they're not satisfied with reflecting the culture.
Yes.
I think they've made a decision at corporate level that they want to change culture.
Yeah.
They're a very large organisation with deep pockets. They can afford a whole series of flops, which really is what they've experienced, and they don't have to change their approach. So I think we'll probably see Disney continue down this path, probably until they get a new CEO. And I know that they've just brought back a former CEO, but I think they'll have to have a major clean out of most of their executives as well. They'll probably have to get rid of a lot of their stars, not sign them up, and make a shift back. But they won't have to do that in a hurry. But I think Tim Pool's right. They are not going to be able to force cultural change overnight, because even Disney isn't big enough to do that.
So obviously this forced culture change is an issue, because they're trying to change the culture to something that we don't agree with. What if the story was flipped and it was a Christian organization trying to rapidly force Christian values and Christian culture onto other people?
Oh, look, that won't work either. I don't think it will, because people are saying, well, we don't want your values either.
Yep.
A lot of people who are reasonably conservative, they're not religious people.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say they've inherited a religious worldview without a relationship with God in it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they would take to having a religious movies and that kind of thing in a big way. Having said that, Christian movies are gaining in popularity.
Yes. Yep.
And of course, and I think people are beginning to realise, for example, the Conservative is not a Christian organisation, but it's a conservative organisation. The Daily Wire is beginning to experience considerable success.
Mm-hmm.
So not only are they majorly, commentating on current affairs, but they've got Jeremy's razors,
Yes.
Jeremy's chocolate with and without nuts. They've launched a number of other product lines which seem to be doing reasonably well. Yep. So they're saying, look, don't spend your money with woke companies. We're not woke. Come and spend your money. I've actually bought their chocolate.
What did you think of it?
It was fine. It was good. It was just chocolate, but I like the wrapper and I like the idea. I actually found it, believe it or not, at an airport in Canada. I was at Vancouver Airport. Wow. It was in a shop there. So I bought some for me and I bought some for a friend of mine as well. But the other thing that they've launched very recently is Bent Key, which is children's television. Unfortunately, we can't get it here in Australia, but in the United States, you can download the app. And they're producing a lot of what looks to me to be pretty good material for young children. And so, I wish them success. And it can happen in America because of the overall size of the population. Well, they've also released a few movies as well, which have been quite successful.
So I want to go back to this idea of forcing change, like forcing culture change, in the fact that it's happened almost instantly that they've tried to change the culture and force it. It was just like almost one movie, bang. Like now everyone's either, it's a diversity quota or it's, or it's LGBTQ or whatever, right? So it's just, now, what if forcing culture change is not successful? Well, because what I believe is one of the biggest issues, and there was actually another topic that came up this week that I thought would chuck in here, but it doesn't, it fits on trend of what we're talking about, but we've got plenty to talk about today. But about having your audience, a particular audience, like, so for example, Disney is kids, families, or if we're talking about the Marvel universe, we're looking at fans that have been fans of Marvel for usually years, if not since their childhood and everything like that. And you mentioned about the Daily Wire producing stuff and doing stuff that is a different culture, but it's not like they've got a captive audience and then they're forcing those people to now consume another thing. They're just going, well, we're producing an alternative, and people who are interested in that are then attracted to it, and then hopefully that influences. It's a big difference from having a captive audience of a particular type of people, and then now telling them this is what you're going to watch and this is how we're going to change it. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of backlash, but let me say it this way. Let me shift it, because obviously we're talking about Marvel and a big multi-billion-dollar company or whatever. Let's bring it back to a local leader, right? Of a local ministry or an or a business, or they may be in politics or whatever. Let's bring it back to like everyday leaders that will be watching this, because I doubt the CEO of Disney will be watching our podcast. If they are, hi, reach out, love a chat. If we're not happy in an organization with the culture, obviously a temptation of leaders is going, I've got to change this right now. I've got to go smack bang and try to force change everything. We're seeing in a large scale, that's not the way to do things. How do we do it?
Well, you do it reasonably slowly. And you would be familiar with the freeze, unfreeze, refreeze model of cultural change within an organisation.
I have, but tell me the details.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar.
Well, look,
I don't know the details.
I'm not a great expert on it myself, but I think what we're actually seeing in the media is they just want to refreeze straight away. But the idea is you kind of stop. And so in a sense, you freeze. It's a bit like taking a photograph, a still photograph of your organisation where it is. So in a sense, that's a freeze phase. Then you work through all of those things that you want to change in your culture. That's what goes on when you unfreeze. Then you make changes, and they might manifest in things like a change in structure, a change in the fundamental policies and practices of the organisation, and then you refreeze. So then you kind of establish the new policies and practices, maybe the new marketing, the new branding, and so on. But you've actually got to go through a process. So in a sense, you stop, you take stock, you implement the changes that are desirable changes, and then you, as it were, freeze the organisation again, but in a different mould, as it were. It seems to me that what we're witnessing in the media, and perhaps also in politics, is that really they want to skip those first two stages and go straight to refreeze. And it might have worked temporarily, but I think we're now seeing a backlash. And where people have the choice, so we've all got a choice not to pay a subscription to a streaming service. We've all got a choice not to bother going to see a new movie. We've all got a choice which political party we vote for. And when we can do it in secret, as it were, I think that's when the conservative side comes out. And I think that's the kind of thing we're seeing at the moment. And so within an organisation, I think anyone who's had experience as a CEO or a senior manager will know that you can't really impose a new culture. You have to lead your people toward a new culture.
That's really good.
And
Say
that's
that again
one
for us, Dr. Rod.
You can't impose a new culture. You've got to lead your people towards a new culture. That's why you're a leader. Look, forget about being a CEO if you're just a good manager. You've got to be a good leader. In fact, my view is that these days, anyone who's in a formal management position has to have the skills of a leader, mainly because you cannot direct people to do anything these days. The sort of old model that might have applied 100 and 150 years ago was of the boss. And it was the boss, usually a he was the boss because he told everybody what to do. In other words, he took a directive approach. But these days, particularly as people have much higher levels of education and so on, and we've got a totally different attitude towards people in authority, leaders cajole, persuade, incentivize people to make changes. They negotiate. That's the word I was stretching for. That's what happens. And so just because you've got a management position, just because you've got a label sitting on your office desk or on your door, doesn't actually mean you can achieve anything. So you've got to apply all of the skills of a leader in order to bring about change. And by the way, when you also may need to shift some of your senior people out of your organisation and bring other people in who whose own values align with the new values that you're trying to establish within your organization.
There's a couple of there's one thing that I kind of want to give as a bit of an encouragement, or maybe a bit of a reminder to leaders, is the fact that if you're not happy with the culture and you want it to change, don't force it quickly. Remember to be patient. Remember to be patient. Like, just look long term. I think that's one of the greatest things we can do as a leader, is look long term to what we're going to be achieving, not like in the next week, but like the old saying, we overestimate what we can achieve in a week, or in short term, but we underestimate what we can achieve long term. And so I think that when we're looking at changing culture, it can be very tempting for us to jump in and try to force that culture change immediately, because, well, I've got to change this. I'm the leader. I've got to change this instantly. But as we're seeing with Disney, it's not working. The forced culture change just doesn't work. We must be patient as leaders and take the long game effect. Understand that there will be some sacrifices on both sides over that journey. And so my encouragement to you is be patient. Don't try to force change, because remember, there is this principle called change fatigue. Change fatigue, that if you try to change too much, and we all know those chaotic leaders that are constantly coming in and every week they've got a new idea and they're going to change the process and change the way we're going to do this, change the vision of the company and change the direction, change the product, change the marketing campaign, change. Your team will get change fatigue. So we as leaders need to be very, very careful about how we implement change, especially when we're talking about change in culture. Make sure you don't do it abruptly. Make sure you take a long-term planned approach to that. But talking about forced leadership, forced culture change by leaders, we're talking about, no, we're not going. You can't do it, immediately and try to change something. Well, there's someone who's trying to do it that way, and he's got my support, although I don't think he's doing it exactly the right way. That is the new Argentinian president. He's different. Let's just say he's different. Now, if you want to see how different, well, actually, I'll share the video. I'll share the video of what we're actually doing. But check the link out in the description to the PBD podcast, where they're talking about Javier Milei. He just won the president's race. He got 56% of the votes. He's not even from one of the two major parties. He's a third party member. He's got radical ideas of shutting down the central bank, ditching the peso, cutting spending. He's on national TV screaming and shouting and swearing and everything like that. And he really, really, really hates the leftists and the socialists, and because Argentina is traditionally a very socialist country, and he's just very vocal about how they do this, and the way that he does it. He's very different. He's coming. He's like, I'm going to change things. Now, this is how much. Let me try to find. I'm going to skip through to the part of the video. Now, this is a video that he posted on social media. Now, check it out in the description below. And he's like, well, he's saying everyone thinks that the state is the solution. It's not. The state is the problem. And then he starts showing all the different departments of the government and everything like that. And then he starts. Let me see if I can jump through. He starts going through, and he goes, the Department of Tourism and Sport, afuera, which means out, right? Culture, afuera. Environment and Sustainable Development, afuera. And he's just going through women and gender diversity, afuera. Your ministry works, afuera. Science, technology, labor, like education, like transport, health, social, like afuera. Like he's just going like, he's quite dynamic, as you can see. He's quite entertaining the way he's doing this. But we just spoke about Disney trying to force culture change. Now, they're trying to change an existing culture that is good into something that is not good. They're trying to force this negative culture. Now let's look at from the other side, Dr. Rod. This guy obviously is, Argentina is not doing that well. Their poverty is at an all-time high. Their economy is terrible. Like all this sort of stuff, right? Like he going, something needs to change. Well, everything needs to change. I'm just going to change it all at once. Now, the practical side of that, or whether he's actually going to be able to do that when he gets into, is different. Obviously, this is just a publicity stunt, but he seems quite, the type of person that'll come in and just try to tear everything up. Kind of reminiscent of kind of what Trump did, like when he came in, he tried to tear a whole bunch of things up. What do you think his success will be? Or do you think that this is the right approach when something's really broken, like the country is broken? Doesn't that then require drastic change?
It may do. I don't know enough about Argentina to make any comment that I would regard as authoritative. But I've been watching this guy for a little while now. Because he can't affect a lot of change himself. He's got to have a lot of support from people within government generally, and also within the public service. So there'll be a lot of resistance, particularly to things like closing down government departments. Now, I believe that the direction that he's indicating is the right direction in which to go. And we need to see government departments totally closed down here in Australia, in the United States, all over Europe, basically all over the world, really. The governments have grown far too big. They are now stripping away our freedoms. And they tax too much production. So governments are reducing the incentives that people have to actually build businesses and even to go to work. And this debilitates economies. Socialism has never worked. In theory, there's much to commend it. There's no doubt about that. And certainly the early church in Jerusalem actually embraced a form of socialism. And all down through the ages, there are Christians who have actually championed this kind of approach. Now, it never works. And it never works because human beings have never been able to get over the problem of sin. We can't do that. Only Jesus can do that. Human beings have never been able to overcome the sin of indolence, which is rife in socialist economies. They've never been able to overcome the sin of greed, which is rife in socialist economies and in all other economies for that matter.
Yeah.
So socialism is a bad idea, but the trouble is there are so many people who end up depending on living off others in a socialist system that is very difficult to replace it. Now, there was some serious academic writing in the early 1980s, and a name that was associated with rapid change, certainly in the economic realm, was Mancur Olson, who wrote a pretty substantial book on initiating and managing change. There is some evidence that it is possible to get away with virtually overnight change in the economics realm. But there is a period of a few years where the adjustment costs are enormous.
Yeah.
Now, he may be able to get away with it because he's got a pretty decent vote. I don't know what's happening in terms of the complexion of the parliament.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about the public service to be able to make a reasonable judgment about how successful he's going to be. I think he will.
I think to jump on what you're talking about, like just to confirm, is like him going through and cutting a whole bunch of departments. That's just going to save the government money. What problems could arise from him cutting a bunch of departments?
Oh, look, the biggest problem will be unforeseen consequences. People falling through the cracks who might be receiving some kind of assistance in a particular government. Look, I think they should close down any department which is work, associated with things like culture and so on, because they're just about manipulating social change, and I don't think the government should be involved in that at all. I think the public service just about everywhere is too complex and far too big to enable free enterprise to flourish. And quite frankly, without free enterprise, you're dead in the water, because it's only free enterprise that can create wealth. Every other system uses wealth. And that's why socialist economies end up being so poor, because there are no incentives for people to take risks and actually build successful businesses. We in the West we've forgotten that lesson in the West, and of course we're heading down the same route as countries like Argentina and so many others in South America. And Europe's been going down that route for a long time. But there are signs of change now. There are signs of change. There's been a significant shift in politics in the Netherlands as a result of their recent elections as well. And we're seeing it in some of the Scandinavian countries too. But look, I think he's going to have a pretty difficult time. I sincerely hope he's got some pretty watchful bodyguards.
Yes.
Because there must be a temptation to assassinate the guy, because he's clearly got an agenda to make massive change to the status quo. There'll be a lot of powerful people who have exploited everybody else to become very wealthy themselves. That always happens in socialist systems. That what tends to happen is that wealth is accrued by a few, and they will protect it at the point of a gun if they have to. And look, that's just empirical. We see that over and over again in history. Just getting back to the Christian side, I've done a little bit of research in recent times, and I've just been horrified really by the number of Christians and theologians who have been outspoken in their support of socialist systems. And I just think they are so naive. They really don't understand the impact of sin in this world.
Yeah, so I did want to jump back onto that, because you kind of breezed over that the early Christian church was a socialist kind of movement.
Well, they did. Well, when I say
explain that a little bit more.
Look, if you read Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, you'll see that remember Peter's amazing address, and there were 3,000 people came to the Lord that day, and they were adding to their number daily. So the Christian church was off to a pretty good start. Now in Jerusalem, Christians were poor, because everybody in Jerusalem was poor. A quarter of the population were living at or below starvation levels. It was a dreadful society. It was a terrible time to be alive on the planet, to be perfectly honest. And really, it was a terrible time to live right up until the early 19th century. I just don't think people understand that for most of human history, life has actually been pretty tough.
Yeah.
And certainly in Jesus' time.
Do you mean
Palestine,
by like the fact that there's no Wi-Fi signal?
Yeah, no Wi-Fi, no AI, none of those things. You were lucky to get one round meal a day. You certainly wouldn't have had a square meal each day. It was really tough, and people were exploited. Most of the human population was oppressed, and there wasn't even a notion that it was possible to increase the size of the economic pie. The generally held belief was there was only a certain amount, and that if you wanted more, you had to take from somebody else. It was a dreadful, dreadful existence until a few key things changed during the Industrial Revolution that began in the United Kingdom about the middle of the 18th century and finally flowed through to Europe and the Americas by about the middle of the 19th century. So the kind of prosperity that we've enjoyed for the last few hundred years is quite unusual in human history. So look, the church in Jerusalem, they devised this system where basically those who had assets sold those assets off, and the money was placed into a common pool, and they're able to ensure that nobody went without. Now, that made a lot of sense actually in Jerusalem at the time, because don't forget that come AD 70, Jerusalem is utterly destroyed. The problem with trying to do anything like that in the long term is that you destroy your productive capacity.
Yeah,
And
that
so
was going to be my question, is like, okay, so you throw all the money in a bucket, and yes, it pays for everyone, But were they doing anything to generate more income from that? Or
Well, certainly. I mean, many of the early apostles, of course, they worked. They didn't receive an income from the church. In fact, there was no professional class of pastors or missionaries until the 4th century.
okay.
So the early church, in most cases, of course, they worked. Paul, of course, was a tent maker or a worker with leather. Others had jobs or actually ran businesses. I think the mistake that many Christians have made is that they've taken the experience of the early Jewish Christians and decided that's what all Christians should do. Karl Barth famously said, all Christians should be communists and all communists should be Christians. Now, I happen to think he was woefully wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no evidence that the church in any of the other major cities that are the subject of the epistles lived that way. And in fact, there are many people who appear in the New Testament who were running businesses, and they used their businesses to help support the church. And don't forget that Paul was also taking up collections to take back to the church in Jerusalem, which was a very poor church. Remember, the ordinary person living in Jerusalem was highly exploited by the priestly class.
Yeah.
They were oppressed. I just don't think we've got any idea today. You know, at this time of year, of course, we're saying, wow, at the Christmas lights and nativity scenes, but it was nothing like that. It was just nothing like that. It was a dreadful existence for most people. Many people were starving. It was pretty tough.
Yeah.
So that was the environment that Jesus was born into. And of course, the revolution that he preached was a revolution of the heart. And again, a lot of Christians get that wrong. And we might come on to that a little bit later when we're talking about the current Pope. But a lot of Christians get that wrong as well. Jesus was all about a revolution of the heart, not a revolution, say, in a political sense. And of course, that was one reason why the Jews at the time did not receive him as the Messiah, because they were expecting someone who would overthrow the Romans and set them free from the Roman occupation. Anyway, we're straying, I think, a long way from our topic. But look, if you're a leader and you're a Christian, you want to do a lot of reading on church history. Get to know what it was like at the time that Jesus was on earth. Get to know the culture, the environment into which Jesus, the man, was born. I think it will change your attitude on a lot of things, and really understand the context of the New Testament.
So let's bring it back to leaders. Like
That's a great idea, brother. That's a great idea.
If you're a leader and you're thinking, yeah, but this guy's the president of a country and he can just go and make random changes and whatever, like, that's different. He cuts out a department and probably saves $10 million or something like that out of a budget or something, or probably even more, probably $100 million out of a budget. It's like, that's great. But I think the message here is sometimes we as leaders step into something that is profoundly wrong. And it may not just be about culture is profoundly wrong. Yes, we're talking about culture, but the organization itself is broken, and that means the culture needs to change, because it's fundamentally the culture that's created. And sometimes it does, to kind of go on the reverse of what we just spoke about, sometimes it does need to be done drastically, because if not, your organization you're gonna go bankrupt. Your ministry is gonna close down. Whatever it may be, may require you need to make some changes. So, as a mirror of what we've just given advice on previously about being patient and change fatigue, all that sort of stuff, what advice would you give to someone who steps into something, a leader who steps into something like something has to change, otherwise the organization's going bankrupt?
Well, you've got a crisis, and leadership is very different in a crisis to what it is in a more normal kind of environment. And yes, if what is at stake is the very existence of a firm, you may well have to make drastic changes, and those changes might have to happen overnight. And typically, of course, they involve things like selling off divisions or selling off the production rights to some of your products, wholesale staff sacking, redundancy on a major level, that may be necessary at times when an organisation is in a major crisis. Now, obviously, good leaders don't allow an organisation to get to that point. Usually, when an organisation is at that point, it's because they've had poor management, poor leadership for a long period of time. Now, we might see that happen with Disney yet. They might become so committed to their campaign for social and cultural change that they eventually do run out of money and run out of backers, and they might wind up in a significant crisis. So look,
maybe the Daily Wire will end up buying them out.
You never know. Well, I don't know whether they will need to do that. They might be popular enough by then not to worry about it. But there certainly are times when an organisation is in such a crisis that you have no other choice. But look,
is that moment that we're talking about, a crisis moment, that's not the moment to change culture. That's the moment to make changes in the organisation and then work on culture once you've got stability?
Well, cultural change has to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And, if you go back to the case in Argentina, the world we have had an experiment like this once before after the Berlin Wall came down. And if you can indulge me for a moment or two as an economist,
I'm interested.
I watched this with great interest, because I've always believed that a capitalist system can only work if it's underpinned by an appropriate moral foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I happen to believe that appropriate moral foundation is found in the pages of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, made that assumption in his famous book, The Wealth of Nations. Now, historians tell us he was a deist, and I think that's probably true, because he had this notion of what he called the impartial observer, who I believe in his mind was God, the God who sort of set the world in motion and then sat back to see how it all unfolded. So in that sense, God is an impartial observer, and we want to basically please the impartial observer. So there's an automatic tendency, if we have that impartial observer in mind, for us not to want to upset that person. And so, as it were, we do the right thing. We can be trusted in our business deals and so on. Now, my observation at the time was when the Berlin Wall came down, it became very obvious that communism had failed, and that in these economies there was a whole lot of production going on that nobody wanted. Everybody knows everything they produced in those countries was inferior. You name it, whatever it was inferior to what was being produced in the West. And so all of these economists and politicians from the West went in and became advisors to new governments in all of these countries in the former Soviet Union. And their mantra was, you need more market. You need to make that transition directly to free markets, to capitalism. I'm not aware of any that cautioned that you need to have an appropriate moral underpinning, because they just naively assumed that it would somehow emerge. Now, if you have a look at the economic data in those economies, it was an absolute disaster for up to a decade after they made the switch. These economies were producing output that nobody wanted, and so lots and lots of companies went bankrupt. Nobody really understood the importance of trust in economic transactions. And so what we saw was a flourishing of crime and prostitution in these countries. And most of them have never recovered. And so if the president of Argentina wants to call me up for some advice, I would say, before you do anything else, you read the history of those economies in the former Soviet Union. Be very wary of advice you get from free market economists and politicians from the United States and other countries, and you talk to people who understand first and foremost, how important it is that you have an appropriate moral foundation for your economy. I can guarantee there's not much trust in Argentina at this point, just as there wasn't much trust in the former Soviet Union economies after the Berlin Wall came down. The first task of any leader who wants to bring in change is to generate an environment, a culture of trust. Because if you don't, it won't work. And I would predict that if he simply goes in, I think it's a great idea to get rid of those government departments. I think it's a great idea for the government to get out of culture altogether, actually, and focus on their core responsibilities, which are providing a secure environment, secure national borders, and security within those borders. In other words, you get tough on crime, you lock up the criminals so that people of goodwill can begin to engage in serious economic activity. But there's not much else the government ought to be doing. You can pretty well guarantee that the people can handle everything else. And so you've got to be so careful that you don't just bring in a new capitalist system overnight. You've got to build on that moral foundation of capitalism first. Frankly, you pick up a textbook these days, they don't even mention it because it's assumed. And I don't think it can be assumed because we're losing it. We're losing it very rapidly. It won't exist in Argentina in the same way that it didn't exist in the former Soviet Union countries. And they still have big problems with crime, big problems with corruption, big problems with things like prostitution and pornography. And I think it was because too many of their advisors were so naive about the importance of an appropriate moral underpinning for their national economies. And, like, I'm a nobody, but mate, I care so much about people. Economics is supposed to be about improving everybody's level of living, bringing freedom in the economic arena to people. That's what it's supposed to be about. And frankly, economics is failed. It's failing us again as we, rush headlong into impoverishing ourselves through all of these green policies and net zero policies. The world's gone absolutely crazy. Isn't that a lovely note to finish the year on?
Well, the world is crazy. And I think that's actually...
You and I are not crazy, mate. We're the two who are not crazy.
The only two.
And a few others.
I think that, the ones that watch this, you're not crazy. You're a smart one. Well done. Because I think it's interesting that one of the things that he cut, one of the departments, was environment and sustainable development. Like, he's like, no, that's gonna bankrupt us.
I probably actually wouldn't knock that one off, but he's moving in the right direction, though.
Look, as a bit of advice to leaders, if you're stepping into a position, into an organization or something like that is failing and it needs some drastic change, go in and do the practical things, but make sure that when you tear things down, that you're building it up on a culture that is based on a good moral standing, and make sure that there is trust. Make sure you're not doing these things for your own selfish gain. If you're going to tear things down, make sure it's for the greater good. Make sure that people can trust you. Make sure you follow through on your word. Make sure that you carry a culture of trust, and that you can embed a culture of trust. Because during this time, as you're tearing things down, there's so much uncertainty in the workplace or whatever. People don't know if their job's safe, and they don't know where the company's going to go, whatever. But if there is still that level of trust, that they know that you will follow through on your word, that everything is moral and no one's trying to pad their own pockets, so to speak, that's the best way to go if you need to do some drastic culture shifts. So a culture shift that I also want to talk about today is not necessarily a culture that is... It's a very slow change of culture. And it's something that I just want to talk about, and I don't know if there's actually going to be too much to talk about. This might be a brief conversation. But Dr. Rod, AI. AI is making this change, right? And there's actually this really good video by AI Symbiosis. Now, they only have 437 subscribers, so go and give them a sub. I think that their content is actually quite good. I think that their content is actually created by AI, so it's quite meta, the fact that it's AI creating content about AI. They've done some great stuff there, and they're going through the different levels of AI, you know, from the most basic system all the way up to what they call singularity, AI singularity. Now, this is like AI is our current culture, and so I couldn't talk about changing culture if I didn't talk about AI, because it is probably the biggest thing, the biggest kind of, I suppose, threat to our culture right now with everyday life. Like my business now, my team, I have a digital marketing team. They use a bunch of AI to do what they do. We use AI here. We use, you know, like you will be surprised at the amount of AI that is in your world right now. AI is actually taking over. It's taking over jobs, it's changing industries. But there's this thing that is leading to, which is called singularity, which is pretty much that the AI can think for itself, it can take actions for itself. And this is the whole Terminator, Skynet kind of thing that it's interesting. As a kid, they were talking about that and they had no idea what AI could do, but they were talking about robots taking over and singularity. This should
Look,
we be
I've
afraid of
just
it?
look. I don't know whether we should necessarily be afraid of AI, but maybe we should be afraid of some of the creators or some of those who are going to use AI for their own benefit. And look, you know, I've been on the earth long enough to have lived before AI,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, then there was simple. I remember the very first timer machine that I ever got. My dad bought it for me. It was a purely mechanical device which switch a light or a radio on at an appointed hour and switch it off again. It was an entirely mechanical device,
Mm-hmm.
but that was a very simple example of AI. Now, of course, with digital techniques, it's much, much more sophisticated. And these days, you can seemingly think about a product, and the next thing you know, you're getting advertisements for it pop up
Mm-hmm.
on your smartphone.
Yep.
It's probably not that there's AI reading your mind, but you've been looking at websites, or perhaps you've had your microphone on and you've had a conversation with somebody, and the AI in your phone has picked it up. I think since social media went commercial, Facebook and others, of course, they've developed algorithms that make money for
Mm-hmm.
people who will pay. And so their algorithms are very sensitive to the websites we visit and what we say in conversation. If we're using VoIP for phone calls and so on, there'll be someone listening, as it were. As soon as you go onto the internet, of course, anything you're doing is observable by somebody else. And I noticed that even VPNs don't work all that well these days. And a lot of sites are now working out that you're using a VPN and they
Yep.
won't let you in.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there are all sorts of problems like that. But look, technology is technology, and technology is amoral. Although one of the concerns about AI is that it will somehow develop its own morality, which might actually not be consistent with what is generally regarded as human morality. For example, with singularity, AI singularity, there is the potential for a morality to develop within AI, which is inconsistent with the general morality that we accept as human beings, and that is that we should not murder one another. So one of the issues associated with singularity is that it just might turn out that the machines decide they want to dominate the world, and they decide we have no purpose and they'll get rid of us. Now, I doubt that that's possible because they are machines, and machines do not possess a soul. If you're a Christian, in fact, if you're a follower of many different kinds of religion, we believe that the human being is ensouled, so that we are something more than the hormones, the chemicals, and the electrical impulses that go on within our bodies and that are being artificially replicated through AI. There are many who would say that singularity is not the main danger. The main danger is fallen human beings using AI to satisfy their own need for power over others. And that's always been a problem with humanity, hasn't it? That some of us want power over the rest of us, and we will use whatever means is at our disposal in order to have power over others. John Lennox, who's a fairly well-known Christian apologist, he's a mathematician. He was in an interview recently, probably last year now, with John Anderson, and I'll send the details so we can put it up in the notes to this podcast. One of his fears, or perhaps not a fear, but one of his predictions is that it won't be long before human beings have the capacity to create a human being who has the capacity to live eternally. We'll do that by harnessing the power of AI, by developing mechanical and other devices that we can implant into our bodies, and by taking a constant cocktail of medications that will keep us happy perpetually. Now, I actually don't believe that people will be happy if they're happy perpetually, because happiness is something which is determined external to ourselves. And we can only be truly...
Happiness is circumstantial. Joy?
It is very much. Well, the idea is
Lord.
that we'll take this cocktail every day. We might wear a happiness patch or something like that, and that will sort of cause all of the hormones and chemical reactions and electrical impulses in our body to sort of generate for us perpetual happiness. I just don't think that, I don't think we can be. But I think there is a very real possibility that death will become a choice. Now, the big moral discussion here has to be over whose decision will the death of any individual be.
So
now, sure,
let's jump on like the end game for AI, right?
Yeah.
Like they do get singularity. The threat is
well, we don't know yet. We don't know that.
No,
that's highly speculative at this stage.
That's what I'm saying. Like, let's say it does get to that, right? You're saying that they, and all the movies, they all talk about this, is the fact that they will be, AI has to produce the best possible outcome. And let's be honest, humans are, I know I'm not, I know, as I was about to say that, I'm like, I know this is not biblical, but humans are a parasite on this earth, right? like they can be seen to be, not really contributors to this earth. Although obviously as Christians, we believe that we are we are actually part of this ecosystem and a valuable part of this ecosystem. But I mean, as far as the movies go, like if the computer to make things better, they decide to wipe us out. Like it seems ridiculous. It seems ridiculous, but it is AI is part of the culture, and that's where it seems to be going. What stops it from getting there?
Human beings have to decide not to let it get that far. Now, I think what we will see is, and I think it's, the potential is here already, if not the actuality exists now, a machine can be programmed to kill somebody.
Yeah.
We see that with drones now.
Yeah.
And so conceivably, a wealthy nation or a nation that appropriates the wealth of the people could develop a whole army of what we might loosely call robots. They might not necessarily look like human beings, but robots that are programmed to kill people.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't mean that the AI itself has a conscience, because it's been programmed by an evil human mind. Now, I don't know whether it's possible to go beyond that. In other words, I don't know whether it's possible for AI to develop, as it were, a mind of its own. That's where some people say it will end up. Now, if it does, and if it's more intelligent than human beings are, and if it develops its own moral code, then it is highly likely that it will lead to the extinction of the human race. Now, I don't think AI can actually get us there, but it could take us to the point where AI devices are programmed by evil human beings to wipe out other human beings. In other words, the big moral debate shouldn't really be, are we going to reach AI singularity? But how do we determine who has control over the development of this stuff? Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that military organizations all over the world are doing things with AI that we have no idea about.
Yes.
And that will be aimed at either defense or offense.
Yeah.
Now, I do think the other big moral issue is not so much singularity, but what do we do when we have the technological capability of being immortal beings, right? And in which case, death becomes a choice. The moral issue will be, whose choice is it? Now, at the moment, we think it's a good thing for people to be able to choose when they die, right? And so governments all around the world have, over the last 20 years or so, and in some cases a lot earlier than that, have brought in legislation that enables people to end their own lives. Now, the next step will be, okay, so let's say we decide that human beings are indeed parasitical and that they damage the environment. So who's going to have the capacity, who's going to have the legal and the moral right to determine which half or 2/3 or 3/4 or whatever of humanity should die? That's a discussion we should be having. And that's a discussion that leaders should be demanding of their politicians, because they're the ones who are going to pass the legislation.
So I want to get in. You've touched on something that's very interesting, and I want to kind of go deep theologically into that. If we can then create ourselves to cheat death, how does that stand? Because obviously, our story as Christians is the fact that we follow Jesus, who is the only one who has cheated death. And
Yeah,
like how does that then play out with the actual
oh, look,
relationship with God?
as John Lennox says, in terms of AI, what are you trying to solve the problem of eternal life for that was solved 2,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Because Jesus defeated death.
So
and
is that another Tower of Babel story then?
Oh, yes, I guess it is. And human beings want to be in control of everything, including death. Where, see, God actually reserves that right to himself.
Yeah.
And that's why Christians down through the ages have been such strong defenders of human life from the point of conception until the point of what you might call a natural death. And, you see that Christians are strong defenders of human life. Christians oppose abortion, for example. They oppose euthanasia. They oppose wanton killing during wartime and so on. It's been Christians who have been very strongly at the forefront. Ultimately, it was Christians who led campaigns against slavery. All these kinds of things. The improvement in the human condition has come about very significantly because of what Christians have done. But I suppose, to be able to conquer death through technology means in many people's mind, we don't need God because we are God.
Yeah.
We are God. And I think that's the ultimate sin, really, for us to say, well, we don't need God because we are God. And look, we are seeing that where, look, most of our institutions, business, government, education, no longer operate under God. They operate as God. So, here in Australia, for example, our government is proposing legislation which would set up a bunch of public servants to determine what is disinformation and misinformation. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that it'll be that will impinge upon our freedom of religion, our freedom of political speech, and so on. This is happening all over the world.
Yeah.
Those in power want more and more control. They don't want to operate under God. They don't want to be constrained by God's way of doing things. They're acting as if they are God. We see it throughout our societies today. My personal belief is that God will draw the curtain fairly soon. I just don't think God will tolerate humanity wanting to be God. We thumb our nose at God in terms of human sexuality, and we say, I am God. Our government thumbs its nose at godly principles of government and says, well, we are God. We will tell everybody what to do. We will take over moral decisions, moral choice from individuals. We see it in business where profit is God or money is God. And my personal view is that that's leading to the decline of Western civilization, which has given us so much over the last few hundred years. Is it a decline which is terminal? I don't know. I suspect it's pretty much terminal. And when we see that and all of the apostasy that exists in the church today, I suspect that God will fairly soon draw the curtain. And I don't think we'll get to AI singularity before God draws the curtain. But we need to be very careful that we don't become too arrogant in that area as well, because it is not given to us to work out how and when God will actually draw the curtain, so to speak, on human history.
So
for me, I just want to stick by my God, whatever it costs.
That's good. And you mentioned about the apostasy in the church. So that's probably the right moment for us to transition into our next conversation, where we are talking about culture change in the church. Now, there was this. We were actually planning on talking about this topic before this. I saw this YouTube video, but I thought this one actually plays it quite well. So it's another video from PBD podcast from Patrick Bet-Davies at Valuetainment, and they have. Let me just turn that on for you. They reported that, like, we're talking about culture change, and there's this culture change in a lot of ministries right now, and I want to kind of talk about what's good culture change, what's not. And this story popped up about some transgender women, or are they transgender men? They are, no, whatever. Like they're men pretending to be women. Like that's what it is. That went and had lunch with the Pope. Now, I think this article has probably blown it a little bit out of proportion. I don't know, because it seemed like it was actually quite a large formal thing, and maybe these people were some of the attendees that were talking about ads. Look, why ads? Yeah, it's this big dinner. Everyone's around. Like, there's lots of people around, and so maybe they were just some people that went along. They're like saying Pope had lunch with trans people. Well, that was probably some of the people that were there. Now, Dr. Rod, obviously, this has been blown a little bit out. Maybe it hasn't, but like there wasn't too much to say there. But obviously, the Vatican or the Catholic Church is, they're making this move to allow trans baptisms and trans godparents, and there's a lot of stuff that they're now moving away from tradition and with some things. First of all, the Pope having lunch with some trans people. I mean, I go back to, didn't Jesus eat with? That was a Freud, whatever. Jesus had lunch with prostitutes and sinners and everything like that, and how are we meant to influence people if we can't have a relationship with them first? But is this right?
That's a good question. On the whole, I think he's wrong.
Okay.
Now, look, this is a pretty difficult area, really, and I'm sure a lot of Catholics will be wrestling with this. I don't think the fact that there were transgender people at a function is really the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is that this Pope has tended to display neo-Marxist thinking in economics, in social culture, and in religion ever since he became Pope. Now, it is significant that he's the first Pope from South America. He displayed, long before he became the Pope, the general traits of liberation theology, which is a neo-Marxist approach to understanding the Bible, and it has its counterparts in economics and in culture. So he's brought into the Vatican, I believe, an overall philosophy which is inimical to what God teaches through his word. But he's not alone in that, because many priests, many Christians, in fact, from Latin America do have strong liberation theology tendencies. Now, liberation theology is Marxist in the sense that it tends to put people into classes. That is, you're in the capitalist oppressor class, or you're in the worker or bourgeoisie oppressed class, and it is right and proper for the oppressed to rise up against the oppressors and, if necessary, kill them. And they do have a way of interpreting the life of Jesus as a radical, which I don't think has got any foundation biblically, but nevertheless, that's where it comes from. Now, look, I think the real damage which the Pope is doing is that he's blurring the boundaries between that which a Pope does as infallible and that in which the Pope is not. Now, Catholic theologians will understand that although the Pope is regarded as being infallible, the Pope, any Pope, is not immaculate. In other words, the Pope is infallible, that is, he's truly representing God when he's making statements of a doctrinal nature. But in other respects, say with an encyclical or public announcements or the way in which he behaves in public, he's not infallible, because the Pope is not immaculate. In other words, everything he says and everything he does is not, as it were, directly communicating from God. Now, I think the really difficult issue for Catholics and for people like myself who are trying to figure out what he's on about is that when he speaks of things like there being many ways to God, but Jesus is but one. So, for example, not long after he took up the papacy, I should say the papacy, He said that Catholics no longer have to evangelize Jews. And he's made other statements since then, which point to universalism. He's made statements more recently about transgenders and gays being able to partake of communion, to be able to become godparents, even to take baptism. Now, I think the difficulty is this, that runs against long-held Catholic theology. The Catholic Church has been a very strong defender of expressions of human sexuality remaining within the confines of heterosexual marriage. It's been very strong on that. But the example that he's been setting of late undermines that strong doctrine of the church. And I think that blurs the lines, at least in the minds of some Catholics, between that in which he's infallible and that which is not. I think he's done a lot of damage to the Catholic Church and continues to do so. And I suspect that many Catholics are turned off and may well leave the church. Now, having said that, most churches will welcome transgender people, lesbians, homosexuals into their church. A church service is a public event, and anybody is welcome. You're allowed to attend. However, your attendance does not mean that the church needs to change its position. If it's a biblical position, that will not change across cultures, and it will not change across time. The biblical position, although there are some theologians who disagree with this, but most theologians would argue the biblical position on sex is strong and unequivocal. The only legitimate expression of human sexuality is within a heterosexual marriage, a monogamous marriage for life. That is, it's an exclusive arrangement. Everything else is sin. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear that. A lot of people in the church don't want to hear that. But nevertheless, that's the biblical position, and politicians can rail against it. Politicians can throw Christians in jail if they want to. They cannot change what the Bible says. Now, I think the Pope is in grave danger of blurring the lines between that which a Pope does in his role as an infallible representative of God and that which he does as a fallible Christian. And I think that's the great damage that he's doing.
So what's, like, obviously, there's one thing in this video that links down below if you want to watch the whole thing, but Jeremy, who's the CEO of Daily Wire, was commenting on, and he made this statement that tradition is really important. I think that's one thing that our current culture, we're very quick to disregard the past. Everything in the past is bad, and so break away from tradition because all tradition is evil, tradition is oppressive, all those sorts of things. Obviously, tradition is important. However, how do you find that balance between, and kind of trying to bring this back to leaders, general leaders, but also leaders of local ministries and stuff, but a business leader. Traditions are important, but organizations have to evolve. So how do you find that balance with still respecting tradition, but growing as an organization, growing as a ministry, growing, like, how do we make that change? Because I suppose the thing is obviously there's, we've spoken about previously about the UMC, the United Methodist Church, that they're having their issues with the LGBT pastors and all that sort of stuff, right? And then on the other side, you've got, we spoke a few weeks ago about the Southern Baptist Convention banning women pastors and all that sort of stuff. And I know we're gonna transition into talking about that in a minute about the Bible verse of that. But you've got one that is evolving and then the other one that is traditional, and they're both doing it wrong. So, like, how do we find that balance?
Well, look, I think a really, really important thing is to understand that history matters.
Yeah.
Tradition is something that has historical roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the big mistakes we've made with our education systems in the West over the last perhaps 50 years is that we've undervalued history.
Yeah.
As a result, we don't have much of an identity because our identity is very largely determined by our history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the reasons why we have so much, I guess, angst in our culture today is that we don't know what our identity is because we're not telling the story of our history.
Yeah.
So, you know, I often talk about the story of Christianity when I'm preaching. I probably, in at least half of my sermons, I take people back to Genesis.
Yeah.
Because Genesis, particularly chapters 1, 2, and 3, are so important to understanding what Christianity is all about.
I have a little bit of a
And
chuckle because you do reference
I know I do
those
it a lot.
chapters so
It's really
much.
important. It's really important. And church history matters. So, you know, for example, a little earlier, we were talking about what you might loosely label as Christian communism.
Mm.
And the only evidence that that ever happened was in relation to the early church in Jerusalem, where it was probably a wise thing to do because the destruction of that city was about to happen.
Yep.
It's really important to understand something about church history.
Mm.
And the same for our nation. The United States has just celebrated Thanksgiving. I think it is important to understand that the experience of those pilgrims, the first, there was just over 100 of them in the first wave of pilgrims. It's really important to understand how and why, and even that, roughly half of them died in their first year. It wasn't because they ran out of food. There were other reasons for it. It's really important to understand the role that the local Indians played. It's really important to understand something about their resilience. Just think about it. How many of us today would have had a 3-day celebration after half of the population had died? You know, that's often regarded as the first ever Thanksgiving. History really, really matters. Thanksgiving in the United States, it's not really about the turkey.
Yeah.
Although the meal often revolves around turkey. Now, there was turkey at that so-called first Thanksgiving. My understanding is the Indians were the ones who got it all. They were sort of, you know, brush turkeys, very different to the farmed turkeys we have today. But the fact that there was a form of communism imposed on those pilgrims because of the agreement that they had with those who financed the establishment of the colony, and it just didn't work. It didn't work because some people were lazy, some people were sick, and those who had to do all the work resented it so much that they just decided they didn't want to work as hard. And they came to the realization that the system which had been imposed on them by those who had provided the finance wasn't going to work. And so that was really how the system of capitalism, which became embedded in the United States, was established. That's a really important story because it helps explain why it is the United States is like it is. Now, that story is under a lot of strain today because people are trying to tell a different story, which almost certainly is historically inaccurate. But because people don't know history, they don't know that they're being told a story that is inaccurate. And so the first thing is know your history. And I think in the corporate context, if you're the leader of an organization, the history of that organization really matters. Do some research in terms of the founders and how, particularly if it's an older business, what was their original vision? What were the values that they brought into that business? And talk about it. And talk about how that compares with what exists in the business today. And then talk about those things that might need to change. Now, almost certainly, one of the things that will need to change is technology. Because if you're taking on the reins of a company which is 100, 150 years old, clearly the technologies that were employed back in those early days are not going to be relevant today. Communication will remain relevant, but the technologies that you use for communication purposes are going to be very different. You'll have a much more highly educated workforce than might have been the case 100 years ago. You'll have people with different aspirations than might have been the case 100 years ago. Take all that into account, but don't ignore history. Celebrate those good things in history. Celebrate the milestones, the first $1 million in sales. Maybe that occurred in 1922. That's worth celebrating. I don't think you should ever denigrate history. It's right and proper to recognise that we've made some mistakes in history. Human slavery, for example, was a mistake and remains a mistake because it's still going on. But I don't think you should throw away a whole culture because the culture made some mistakes in the past. We should recognise those mistakes and say, you know what? We've learnt from that, and we don't have to organise our business or our society on those lines into the future. I don't see the celebration of corporate histories happening very often these days. And I think it's very sad. I think it's wrong, because I think an organisation is stronger if it recognises its history. And hey, look, if in the early days of a company, it had appalling policies towards the environment, just face up to say that was the case. You know, we chopped down a whole cedar forest, for example, that will never regrow. And that's not a good thing. We're sorry about that, but we've learned from that. We've learned the lessons of history, and we're taking more care of the environment today, which, by the way, if you're a Christian, you should be concerned about the impacts of your activities on the environment. That doesn't necessarily mean we should preserve the environment, but we should be aware of the impact of our activities on the natural environment, and we should prayerfully consider what we might do to mitigate those impacts. We could talk for a month on this, Craig. We really could, and I think it's a really important thing.
Which we're not going to talk for a month because we're having the next month off. So to wrap up this last podcast, I want to transition from like what we mentioned before about staying to traditions. Well, staying to traditions, like we've mentioned previously about the Southern Baptist Convention, how they banned women passing. We spoke about that going back a couple of months ago. Actually, we spoke about it twice because we spoke about it once and we did it in our 1 year anniversary one because it was one of our most commented videos. Afterwards, you actually then spoke to me a little bit like, in passing, and shared some amazing Bible verses and your backing for your belief that we should have women pastors or women leaders in ministry and everywhere. And I think this goes to your point of what you were just talking about with making sure we know our history. Because it's funny that they are sticking so strong to a tradition that actually is missing some of the real history. And so, as always, we finish our podcast off with our leadership lessons from Luke, referring to Luke. And actually, I didn't tell you this at the start, Dr. Rod. I don't know whether I want to read through the whole thing or whether you just want to share the story of this. Do you want to take the lead on this one? Because I loved what you shared with me about this.
Well, look, I guess, everybody knows Easter. There wouldn't be too many people who are not aware of the Easter story. And often, we can read the Bible, we see that Jesus revealed himself as the resurrected Lord and Saviour first to women.
Now
Now, it
we
might
are
have,
we are referring to Luke chapter 24, verse 1 through to where is it? Through to 12. Okay, so
yeah.
if you want to follow along at home, that's what Dr. Rod's talking about.
No, so look, I suppose today, we can read that and, oh yeah, good, oh. But this was an incredibly radical thing. Now, of course, the disciples had all run away. They were in fear of their lives. They kind of disappeared off the scene altogether. They weren't hanging around the tomb. There's a group of women who went to the tomb to grieve, and Jesus appeared. Now, what's significant about that is that these women were the first witnesses of the resurrected Jesus. Now, women couldn't be witnesses in that culture. A woman's testimony had no value. In legal cases, you needed two male witnesses. The general principle was you needed two male witnesses to any event for it to be something that could be dealt with in the courts, as it were. So Jesus reveals himself to women who are not even regarded as witnesses. They're not regarded as reliable. He then instructs them to take the news to the disciples, which they do. Now, as it turns out, the disciples received that news, which says something about these women, how they were regarded. Now, I believe they were regarded as leaders. And the reason why I say this is that a little later on, when Saul, I should say, who becomes known as Paul, was persecuting Christians, when he was on that road to Damascus, where he had a life-changing encounter with Jesus, he was on the way to Damascus to arrest the Christian leaders there, and they were both male and female. There were both men and women in that group. That was highly unusual because women weren't leaders, not even in the Greek or Roman cultures. And generally, when there was a war or something like that, the women and children could come and go as they pleased because they weren't in any danger. It was the men who were in danger. But Paul was on his way to Damascus to arrest both men and women. Now, for that culture, this, I think, was a highly radical thing for Jesus to do, to reveal himself to the women, for the women to take the news, and for that news to actually be received. Now, I don't think that means that women should dominate, but I do think there's an important message for us blokes there, and that is that God regards women as potential leaders no differently to how he regards us. And there's much more evidence in the Bible. If I can say just briefly, those who believe that women shouldn't be elders or pastors, they often use as their texts passages that actually refer to household or marketplace governance, not to church governance. And those few passages that relate to church governance, I think, although on the surface they look pretty awkward, when you relate them to the cultural environment of the time, they say something a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so we need, I think, to be careful that biblically we separate household governance from marketplace governance from church governance. I think there is a particular role for the male in terms of being head of the household. But when you hear that expression, you mustn't think that this means that you're the boss. You must think of yourself as head of the household as a spring or a waterfall is the head of a river, because that's what the Greek words that are used actually mean. So to be head of a household as a man, you need to see yourself as the head of a river of blessing flowing to your wife and to your family, not as the boss. And by the way, it's really interesting. This is a bit of an aside that people often refer to the curses that came as a consequence of original sin. And here we go back to Genesis chapter 3. But many people note, of course, that the man shall rule the woman. That's one of the consequences of that sin, was that the woman's desire shall be for the man, and the man shall rule over the women. But in Ephesians chapter 5, Paul says to men, love your wives. A lot of people just read over that without understanding its significance.
Yeah.
Our salvation redeems us all the way back to pre-sin Eden, right? And so that curse no longer applies. The Greek and the Roman cultures were very strong on the idea that the man ruled over his wife, his children, and his household, which is roughly equivalent to the market today. But Paul says there in Ephesians, husbands, love your wives.
Yeah. Just
so this
Christ.
idea that husbands rule over their wives is absolutely anachronistic. And I think it misunderstands the fullness of our salvation. We're redeemed all the way back to pre-sin Eden. And not all theologians will agree with that, but I'd take them on any day.
You're using that as an example for husbands and wives, but I actually see that as a leadership principle as well. Like the way that we should lead people is leading them through love, leading them, being that spring that we are.
It's a good principle. It's a good principle. And look, there are a number of cases in the New Testament, of course, of women who were in business. So I have no issue with women leading in the marketplace. I don't have an issue with women leading in the church. What I do take issue with is women trying to be men.
Yes.
I think one of the great lies of the devil that sort of came into being with the feminist movement is that not that men and women are equal, but that men and women are identical. I think that's the wrong thinking that underlies the transgender movement and so many other things that are destroying our society. And I can find many references in the Bible to the way in which equality between men and women is outworked. And it is outworked in leadership, among other things. But the Bible nowhere gives us leave to believe that men and women are equal. In fact, I sort of scandalized my church a few weeks ago when I said, if you don't believe me, look down. Righto? We're not identical. We're not identical. There are so many ways in which we're different. And I think it's significant that Eve is essentially the completer, the one who completes Adam. That doesn't put her in an inferior position. I think it's highly significant that although Adam was created from the dust, Eve was created from Adam. I think that's God giving us a strong indication of the covenantal oneness that a man and a woman ought to express and experience in marriage.
Yeah.
And I could talk long about. In fact, I've done a series on marriage where a strong focus was on what covenantal relationship means in the context of marriage. I'm on my way through a series in my own church now, looking at the various theological positions on the role of women in the church. And of course, you have to deal also with women in the marketplace and women in the family when you're talking about the role of women in the church as well. But this passage in the chapter 24 of Luke, it's so easy to just gloss over it. But it was really a game changer. These women were becoming leaders in the church. Some of them were already leaders in the marketplace. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a significant leader. Now, she must have been, because do you know what? She usurped the position of the groom and the groom's father when she instructed the servants of the groom's household to do what Jesus told them to do. The first recorded miracle when Jesus turns water into wine. That wouldn't have happened if those servants hadn't been obedient to Mary, a woman.
Yeah.
You know, we read these stories and we don't really meditate on what they meant. For that woman to have so much authority in that context means something.
Yeah.
She was a leader. And of course, there's a fair bit of evidence, and some of it's extra biblical evidence, that she was an important leader in the early church as well.
Yeah.
So this narrative, it's not there just to fill in some space. It's there, I think, because our Lord is trying to say something to us about women.
Yeah.
We're equals, we're co-creators with God, but we're not identical, and we shouldn't try to be identical.
Yeah.
We're different. As I say, look down and you see we're different. Celebrate the difference. Welcome women into leadership teams. I can attest to how good it is when you have both men and women on a leadership team. We do think differently. Men tend to be a little bit more task-oriented than women. Women tend to have a little bit more in terms of feeling. And I tell you what, if you're working through a change process in an organization, you need both perspectives.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've built leadership teams with both men and women. I seek to do that deliberately now, not because I'm trying to meet some quota, but one, because I think it is biblical, and two, because I see empirically you end up with better decisions, you end up with better outcomes as a result. And look, I know there'll be many people watching this podcast who have a different perspective. And if I can say one thing about the so-called complementarian view, it never, ever, ever seeks to give men the authority to lord it over women.
Yeah.
People who hold this position are sincere. They've searched the scriptures and come to this particular position. I mean, I have my own family members who worship in churches that are complementarian in their own doctrine. I honour people who hold that position, and I don't seek to persuade people differently, but I hold to a different position, and I believe I have very strong biblical grounds for doing so. The complementarians never seek to see women under the thumb in the home, in the marketplace, or in the church. What they do believe, however, is that there is evidence from Genesis, there is evidence from nature, and there is evidence from New Testament scripture that although men and women are equal, we are nevertheless complementary and therefore have different roles. So I just want to make it very clear, I honour people who hold a different position to me, but I just as strongly hold that men and women are created equal. I agree with the proposition in Genesis, but I don't agree that most of the scriptures, nor do I agree that we should choose nature as the model, because we are created higher than the animals and the inanimate creation. It says so in Psalm 8. And I believe many of the scriptures from the New Testament that are used actually apply to context outside the church as well. But I do want to make it very clear, I honour those who hold a different position. And I want to also make it clear that complementarians in no way support male violence against women, male domination of women. They don't support that at all.
Yeah. So like, to come back to the verse that we're talking about, you know, the women being the first ones to carry the gospel and stuff, which is,
they were essentially the very first preachers. Essentially,
yep.
they were.
And so we're talking about changing culture, and to bring this back as a leadership lesson, it just kind of re-emphasizing your earlier point of like, tradition's important. If you want to change culture or maintain a culture, make sure you know the history. Dr. Rod has just spent the last 15-20 minutes just kind of rattling off a bunch of different examples of where where we actually, there's a lot of misconceptions around things. So know your history and go to this thing for wisdom, and don't cherry pick a verse, and don't read over a verse just thinking it's just a story. There is so much in it. The women finding Jesus, Mary, instructing the servants, and so on and so forth, right? Like make sure you actually there's so much stuff that you need to learn. There's so much more in the Bible to get into the scriptures, but as a leader, make sure you know your history. If you've enjoyed this, I've really enjoyed this. It's been our last one. We've gone a little bit longer today, reminiscent of our early days when we used to go really long, Dr. Rod. But it's been great talking about changing culture. Just remember that as leaders, we are called to change culture, but how we do it and how we actually approach it will actually reflect on our leadership, but also it will cause a different result. Let's not try to force things too quickly, but if things need to be changed, do it from a moral grounding. Make sure that we focus on tradition, but know our history as well. So if you've enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up and put a comment below. Like, what culture do you feel like you're called to change or influence, or what cultures is really irking you right now? Give us a comment below. But also, please consider, this is our last podcast for the year. So consider subscribing so that you'll get notified, and also put that notification bell thingy, you know the deal, so that you know when we actually go live again early next year. We're taking just over a month off. I think it's going to be about 6 weeks we end up taking off. But we'd really, and hey, go back and watch a whole bunch of our old videos. There's so much there over the last year or so that Dr. Rod and I have been doing this podcast. So thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And Dr. Rod, thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience for us this year. It's been an incredible year. I appreciate your time. You are such a blessing to me, and I hope that people see that you're a blessing to them. So thank you for what you contribute.
Well, as I said before, I really count it a special privilege to be able to do this. You and I have known each other for well over a decade now. Mm-hmm. We've become pretty good mates, even though I suppose in a sense I'm older. I was going to say wiser. I've probably just made more mistakes than you have, but we've got a great relationship, and we basically keep each other honest, mm-hmm. which is really important. And look, if you're watching this podcast now and you've got nobody who will help keep you honest, you need to find somebody that you trust enough, someone who loves you enough to hold you to account. It's so important. And of course, there is so many pressures on us that will take our mind off the word of God. But we really need to have one or two very close friends who love us enough to hold us to account. So my exhortation to you in this last podcast for the year would be, if you haven't got someone like that, find them. If you're in business, as you know, I'm the business pastor. I'm very happy to provide whatever input I'm able to do. In some cases, it will be at a considerable distance. But I believe that the Word of God has a lot of really important keys for business, and perhaps through a conversation or some exchange of email correspondence, we can help with your own business. And of course, pastors don't charge people for being pastors, mm-hmm. and that's why I call myself the business pastor. This is not a money-making thing. But let me tell you, I know some very good business coaches and some very good business mentors, and if they're the kind of people you need, I'd be only too happy to help you. And you're watching one of them right now, and it isn't me. So God bless you, Craig, and thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity that I have week by week to spend some time with you in public as we share our views and our ideas with all those who do us the honor of watching.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Rod. And thank you. And please remember, over this Christmas break, remember to learn, live, and lead on purpose.